G'day guys and welcome to this business management lesson. In today's lesson we're looking at key knowledge point 414, 415 and 416. That's Unit 4, Area of Study 1 and the 4th, 5th and 6th key knowledge points for this area of study. Today specifically we're looking at Lewin's force field analysis theory and all of the parts, all of the pieces that need to be considered to fully understand Lewin's force field analysis theory. These three key knowledge points all deal with different factors, different elements of Kurt Lewin's force field analysis theory, and that's why we're looking at all three key knowledge points together. Buckle in, this is going to be a long one. Now, I've already alluded to the fact that force field analysis theory was first proposed by Kurt Lewin. He was a bit of a genius theorist when it came to the concept of change and change management, and his force field analysis theory can be broken down into the idea that whenever you try to implement a change, there are going to be some forces that will reinforce the change, they'll contribute towards the successful implementation of a change, they will drive the change. And that there will be forces that get in the way, they slow you down, they introduce barriers to the successful implementation of a change, and they will restrain the change. These forces are the driving and restraining forces. And if you paid attention to those three key knowledge points that I just alluded to, 414, 415, and 416, you'll see that 414 is a summary of Kurt Lewin's force field analysis theory. 415 and 416 are specifically looking at the different driving and restraining forces that can crop up in business contexts. That's what we'll be talking about today. Ultimately, Kurt Lewin's theory comes down to the point that if the restraining forces are stronger than the driving forces when you're looking to implement a change, the change will not be implemented successfully. Let's take a closer look. Let's say, for example, that the change that you're looking to introduce in your business is the implementation of automated production in your operations system. Well, you want this change, and the driving forces are the things that are pushing for this change to be implemented successfully, including things like automated production will increase your profit margins because it reduces your costs. There'll be improved productivity from the automated production line, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, not taking sick leave, not needing a rest, not needing a break. The increased productivity will allow you to take advantage of economies of scale, and it might reduce the purchasing cost of your inputs, allow you to purchase more inputs at a reduced price per unit, and certainly not paying wages into the future will reduce your long-term costs. These are all going to be contributing to your desire to implement this change. There will be reasons that you are inspired to pursue this change. They will be reasons that make this change one that is accepted by involved stakeholders. Your shareholders might think that these are really good reasons to pursue this change and support the change for these reasons. Of course, the driving forces that are pushing for the change are not the only thing we need to consider. We have restraining forces that are pushing back as well. And those could be that investing in technology like automated production is very expensive. So there's going to be high setup costs. Certainly, if you're looking to implement automation, you're probably going to have some operations staff that find themselves suddenly redundant, and that might impact the morale of the remaining employees. And if I get out of the way, it might just be that implementing a change like this sounds like a lot of work, and you can't be bothered going down the path, going through the motions, following the process to get this change implemented. When you're doing force field analysis, when you're applying the force field analysis theory, you get to the point where you need to weigh and rank the different forces that you've identified. So in our little example, you can see that I've included a table up here to show you what it might look like when you start assigning significance or ranking these forces. I've summarized the increased profit margins and reduced long-term costs as will reduce business costs, increasing profitability. And we've given that a weighting of 4 out of 5, just for example's sake. We'll say that that's going to be pretty convincing to the shareholders. Certainly as a manager, as a business owner, that's going to inspire you to pursue this change. And we've given the idea that you'll increase your productivity and be able to take advantage of economies of scale. A weighting of 4 also, because that's a significant consideration for a lot of operations managers or a lot of business managers. And on the restraining force side, we've looked at the high initial expenses as being quite significant. That will be a cause for concern, but perhaps it's not going to be more convincing than the long-term reduction in costs. We've identified the redundancies as a 2 out of 5, because while it might be a problem that there's a reduced morale in the staff that remain in operations, the fact that you're going to be getting rid of a lot of them anyway means that this hit on morale isn't so important, and you'll be able to implement strategies to restore employee trust and employee morale for the remaining employees after this change is implemented. And the sort of can't be bothered restraining force, we've given that a 1 out of 5. It's not terribly important. It's not going to get in the way. And so if we were to do a force field analysis just for this change, and these are all the factors that we need to consider, we can see that we have a score of 8 for our driving forces, and a score of 6 for our restraining forces, and we could be positioned well at this time to identify that this change is likely to be successful if we proceed with its implementation. Ultimately, when you're weighing and ranking forces for your force field analysis, it's important to have considered everything. It's important to be totally aware of the forces that are acting on this change, the driving and restraining forces, to consider different stakeholder groups and the impact this change would have on different stakeholder groups. It's important that when assigning significance, it's not just done off the cuff, as I've sort of done with this example, but it's a much more focused and deliberate process that is based on significant research and investigation of the business context and business environments so that you can come to an informed decision. But let's say, for example, that you did your weighing and ranking of the forces and you identified that there are restraining forces that are actually going to be a significant problem if you desire to proceed with this change. Then what we can do is prioritize the most significant restraining forces and leverage, perhaps, some of the driving forces we have or some of the strengths you have in your business to try and minimize those restraining forces, or even implement brand new strategy to try and reduce or minimize those restraining forces to improve the chances of achieving successful implementation of your change. The whole idea behind a force field analysis is not just to see whether a change is worth pursuing, but it's to identify the forces at play in your business environment so that you can implement strategy and implement processes to ensure that the change can be implemented successfully after overcoming and reducing the relevant restraining forces. Now, the benefits of force field analysis are ultimately that you're going to have that opportunity to identify and analyze forces for and against the change, which are going to mean that you're less likely to be pursuing change in a futile manner. If you're just trying to implement change, if you just wake up one day and think, you know what, today we're going to try and automate our operations, without having done the due diligence, the research, the investigation that a force field analysis requires, then it's less likely that your change will be implemented successfully. If you've talked to relevant stakeholders, if you've felt out the temperature in the room with your employees and how they would feel if you did this, if you've spoken to your shareholders or your business owners and found out how they feel about this, if you've investigated the costs, investigated the long-term costs, done some calculations with regards to wages, etc., and identified at the end of all of that that this is too hard, the amount of money you'd have to invest now, it wouldn't be paid off for 10 years, and in 10 years' time, this technology might be redundant, you'd have to replace it, then perhaps it's not for you, and it's a good idea that you did that force field analysis to get that information to know whether or not the change is worth pursuing in the first place. And certainly, if you identify that it is worth pursuing, but your business is not yet positioned for that change to be successfully implemented, that is another real benefit of force field analysis, that you could make that discovery and then implement strategies to reinforce the driving forces and minimize and overcome the restraining forces. Now, this second key knowledge point of the 3 we're talking about today specifically deals with the different driving forces that a business manager needs to be aware of. And helpfully, this key knowledge point gives us a list of the different driving forces that you're expected to know. So I'll remind you, those driving forces, or these driving forces rather, are the forces that contribute to the successful implementation of change in a business. Now, these are going to be pretty general because, generally speaking, some of these driving forces will be present or worth considering in any change management scenario. Not all of them all the time, but some of them all the time. Considering managers as the driving force, it's managers that make the decisions in a business. And if managers have looked at some KPI data and decided that some corrective action is required, or managers might have gone off some training, perhaps a seminar or a conference, and come back with new and exciting ideas, well, they're the ones who make the decisions. So if they decide that a change is necessary and a good idea, their enthusiasm will drive the change forward. It's pretty straightforward that managers are the leaders, and if the leaders decide change is necessary, then there's quite a lot of driving force behind that change. And certainly, employees are the people who do things in your business. If the employees are agreed that there's a need for a change, that's going to put a lot of force behind that change. If employees feel that the workplace is unsafe and start demanding safer working conditions, the managers are going to have a hard time resisting that change. Unions are very strong when employees join them because employees who band together can achieve significant change in a business just as a result of them having a unified voice and a unified vision. Competitors can be a driving force for change in your business in the sense that you want to outperform them ideally, and if they're doing things to establish their own competitive advantage, your business may well be driven to change in response. This can be proactive or reactive, as we've talked about previously. It might be that one of your competitors has been taking market share from you in a certain sector for a while, and so you start investigating what you can do to specifically gain some of that market share from your competitor. Or it might be that your competitor has implemented some new strategy, and so you're looking to implement a reactive strategy to resume high performance. Legislation that changes can drive change in your business. Certainly, sometimes legislation might be the only driving force, and it might be so significant that any restraining forces are irrelevant. For example, if federal legislation changes with regards to documenting customer data, or to do with the way that you pay tariffs or taxes, or the way that you do international trade, then your business would be incredibly foolish to ignore it. The consequences for ignoring that kind of legislative change could be dire for your business, and so it might be that the law changes, and to remain compliant, you have to implement a change in your business. Certainly, pursuit of profit is a very common driving force. If there's an opportunity to increase the profitability of your business, that might be enough to drive change, or certainly in partnership with other driving forces, might contribute significantly to the pursuit of some change, where shareholders can see that the value of their investment has a chance to go up, where employees can see that the business they work for might gain a little bit more success in terms of profit, which would add to their own sense of job security. That would certainly help them get on board with a change. So it might be just making a business more profitable is enough to drive change forward in many cases. And certainly, the other side of that coin is reduction in costs. In a way, it will contribute to profitability, but knowing that costs are to the detriment of business profitability, finding ways to reduce costs, like implementing lean management, pull, one-piece flow, etc., or implementing waste minimization strategies, or implementing technology to improve the efficiency of operations. These are all strategies to reduce costs, and it might be that specifically you pursue these changes in the spirit of reducing costs. Globalization may present an opportunity to your business that drives you to change. It might be that you can see an opportunity to market your products to customers in territories outside of your own. It might be that you have this opportunity to source inputs from overseas suppliers. Whatever it is, the opportunities that globalization presents may drive change for your business. And technology is changing all the time. New technology, as it's introduced to your business, or the opportunities that new technology present, might be enough to drive change in your business. Certainly, this handsome little GIF right here of Amazon using drones to deliver deliveries, I guess, to customers, is a bit revolutionary. And the idea that they don't need truck drivers for that, the idea that they are able to deliver things to unique locations rapidly, certainly if that ever came to be a real service they delivered, would establish them firmly as a market leader in online retail. And innovation, just the idea that new things can be invented, new processes can be established, or improvements on existing processes, improvements in existing products and existing supply. These things can be thought of, can be cracked onto, and these new concepts or new opportunities might also be a driving force for change. And of course, societal attitudes change. Over the course of human history, we've seen slavery come into and then it's very much out of fashion. We've seen emergent technologies like typewriters come into and out of fashion. And we've seen trends and fashions like the emo phase and the hipster phase come into and out of fashion. Societal attitudes change constantly. Definitely these days, in the more modern era, environmentalism and concern about climate change is a societal attitude that's changed more recently, and businesses are more and more being expected to be very aware of their environmental impacts and to demonstrate that they are taking steps to reduce environmental harm as a byproduct of their business operations. That's something societal attitudes have brought to the business market. And we know absolutely that businesses that fail to keep up with these changing attitudes will fall behind. They'll lose their competitive edge and they will be irrelevant before too long. And finally, this last key knowledge point has us look at restraining forces in business. Once again, we're being pretty broad. I'm not giving you specific details that would apply to any one case study because these can be common across any case study. Restraining forces are any of those things that you try to implement a change and they get in the way for whatever reason. Now, you might notice, if you're looking very carefully, that we start with a couple that were on the driving force list as well. And that's because just because managers make the decisions doesn't mean that they'll be deciding to implement change every single time. Certainly where employees are a driving force for change, maybe the managers are a restraining force. The employees are saying, hey, we want a pay rise. The managers might be saying, not so fast, not today. Managers can absolutely be a restraining force for change. And this doesn't just mean managers against employees. It could be managers against managers. It could be that middle or lower tier managers don't necessarily support changes proposed by upper levels of management. Or it might even be that managers in some cases don't have the skills or experience necessary to implement a change effectively. It might be that they were passionate about the change, but they just lack the people skills, or they lack the IT skills, or they lack the planning skills to not actually be a restraining force for the implementation of that change themselves. And employees. While employees can absolutely be a driving force for change, in many cases they can just as easily be a restraining force for change. Ultimately, people don't like change. People who talk about liking change typically mean they like change where they're in a very narrow window of their sphere of comfort. And for many individuals, change in a workplace can bring on feelings of fear and anxiety. And where people are afraid or anxious about the impacts a change will have on them, they're unlikely to support that change wholeheartedly. Certainly, where employees don't feel that they've been consulted or that there are unanswered questions in the realm about the impacts of a change, they're likely to resist the change. And certainly, doubling down, when change is known that it's going to have negative impacts on employees, that's when employees can really act to restrain a change. If a business does propose the implementation of automated production, and there's going to be a huge round of redundancies, the employees might be meeting together, might be trying to negotiate with management to stop this change because they know that it means that many of them will lose their jobs. Now, it might be that the biggest restraining force in some cases is just the lack of time available. It might be that there is too much time and the change will lose momentum because of the massively elongated time frame in which it's supposed to be implemented, or more likely, it might be there's just not enough time to train your employees to utilize the equipment that's part of the change, or there might not be enough time to consult with all of the relevant stakeholders. And that might mean that a change is just unable to be implemented successfully at all. Certainly, organizational inertia is a big one. Organizational inertia is the fancy name for that this is a big job, I just can't be bothered kind of concept. People don't like change. People like routine. And if you've gotten used to doing something a certain way, you're probably going to want to keep doing it that way. Consider where you sit in class. Is it the same every time? If it is, how would you feel if you walked in and someone else was sitting in your seat or at your table? It's probably going to throw you off a little bit. You're not going to like that. Think about what you do when you get home from school. Think about what you do as part of your nighttime routine as you get ready for bed or first thing in the morning. Think about certain areas of your life. You're likely to have routines that you've established that you stick to pretty closely in some area of your life. And when people threaten the routines that we've become comfortable with, well, we can become very uncomfortable indeed. And if you've gotten used to showing up to work in a certain way or showing up to school in a certain way, when changes are presented that would be a deviation to those routines, you're likely to feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is organizational inertia. It tends to be much stronger in businesses where routines have been established for a long time. So consider your school uniform if you have one. You've gotten used to putting on those trousers or that dress. You've gotten used to wearing your jumper or your blazer or your hat. And if the school suddenly proposes a change to that uniform, well, it could be a great change. It could be a very poor change. But does it even matter? If someone's proposing a change to that uniform, how are you going to feel about it? You're unlikely to have a strong positive reaction as your first reaction, because once you've become familiar with something, it becomes more comfortable than the unknown. And finally, legislation. Again, if legislation has forced you to do something different, it's a driving force. If legislation stops you from doing something, it's a restraining force. You might be looking to buy out one of your competitors, but the ACCC might be feeling that would be a breach of anti-competition legislation, and so they block that proposed change. And in that case, very hard to get around, very hard to diminish that restraining force, but in some cases, you might be able to look at selling off a different part of your business to satisfy the ACCC. If you're talking about that level of business, then there's all sorts of legal considerations that are sort of beyond the scope of this class. And financial considerations. Much like time as a restraining force, you might not have the money. Maybe the cost of implementing technology in the form of automation is the thing that stops you from being able to pursue that change. Maybe you just don't have the money to launch production of personal jetpacks. The amount of investment you would have to make to develop and produce and retail that kind of new and emergent product might be billions, trillions of dollars more than you actually can afford. Certainly, in the case of any change, a business should perform a cost-benefit analysis and work out that they can afford to pursue that change. Because for many businesses, spending any money at all is going to be a restraining force, and it just might be that financial considerations prove to be the point that proposed change becomes unfeasible. Certainly, restraining forces don't have to stop the change. It might be that one of the restraining forces for any change is financial considerations, and you have to work to ensure that you can afford to meet those financial requirements for this proposed change. In summary, for these three key knowledge points, Lewin's force field analysis theory can be applied in times of change to evaluate, weigh, and rank different forces that will contribute to or resist the successful implementation of a change. Driving forces are those forces that reinforce and support change. Restraining forces are the forces that resist the implementation of a change. And the important part of force field analysis is that you're identifying, weighing, and ranking those forces. Then triaging or prioritizing the most significant restraining forces and implementing strategies to both reinforce driving forces and reduce or minimize restraining forces until you are confident that the driving forces significantly outweigh the restraining forces, and you are confident that you'll be able to pursue the implementation of your proposed change successfully. That's all for today. See you next time.